May 1963, deep in the central Appalachians, I stepped out of the back of a dull green truck and felt the cold clay shift under my boots. The night sat heavy in the hollows. No wind moved. The driver killed the lights and idled there without a word, as if sound alone might shake something awake in the hills. I checked my pack by touch. My hands shook more than they should have. I told myself it was from the long ride, though I knew it was not. Fog settled in patches across the old fire road, clinging like breath to the ground. The trees crowded close. Their trunks looked like thin men standing guard. A low vibration, soft as a buried motor, hummed under the soil. I felt it in my ankles before I heard it. None of us spoke about it, we just listened. Our maps showed nothing here except timberland and forgotten mines. But a colonel in a windowless room at Bragg told us a different story, one that pointed straight into these mountains. Standing in that dark entrance of the woods, I felt the first weight of what waited ahead. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. May 1963 stayed with me for a long time. Even now, I can still see the hills when I close my eyes. Right after we stepped off that truck, we moved down the fire road in a spread that felt too formal for a place so quiet. The fog closed behind us and hid the tailgate. By the time the truck turned around, the sound of the engine was already gone. It felt like we had stepped into a space cut off from the rest of the map. I kept my rifle low and watched the tree line. The ground was damp from a light rain that had passed before dawn. Mud pulled at my boots. A few moths drifted near our covered lens lights, even though the cold should have kept them away. I noticed them, then pushed the thought aside. A lot of things looked off that night. I did not want to spend all my energy on small signs when the real trouble waited deeper in the hills. Back at Bragg, the briefing had been short. Too short. A colonel, who never gave his name, walked us through a file thin enough to fold in half. He kept most of the pages upside down on the table, as if hiding the text would hide the truth. He pointed at a small dot in the mountains and called it Fort Simon. I'd never heard of it, none of us had. Old records instead called it an unnamed fort from the 1800s that guarded a pass used by traders. Later, Army survey teams rebuilt parts of it in the late 1940s and carved deeper rooms into the rock. After that, the paper trail faded. Our orders were simple on paper. Move in on foot, locate the buried site, confirm there was no foreign presence, plant beacons for a follow-on team. The colonel gave those points in a flat voice, as if reading from memory. Then he paused. He told us not to speak to any local people about old forts, strange sounds, or lost units. He said the map we carried was the only one marked with the fort's grid. When he slid it across the table, the edges curled like it had been copied too many times. Before the briefing ended, the air handler kicked on in the ceiling. A low hum rolled through the room. It made the colonel flinch. He tried to hide it, but I saw the small twitch in his jaw. That was when I knew this job belonged to the kind of programs no one wrote about. I had done a few odd assignments after Korea and during early work in Vietnam. Some had strange gaps in the paperwork, but none of them made an officer flinch at the sound of a simple fan. Our team leader, Captain Harris, kept his thoughts to himself. He was a quiet man who did not waste words. He told us to pack light and prepare for 3 to 4 days in the field. No resupply, no support except limited radio contact. Harris trusted men who kept moving and kept their eyes open. That was why he picked us years earlier. We had spent enough miles together to read each other without talking. Ortiz carried the radio and handled signal work. He had a knack for tuning out noise and focusing on faint marks in the static. In Korea, he once pulled a clear message out of a broken handset. Phillips was our medic. He moved slow and careful, but when things fell apart, he could work through chaos like it was nothing. McBride served as our sharpshooter. He walked with a slight limp from a mine blast, but he never missed a line of sight. Klein handled engineering and demolitions. He understood how old structures failed and how to make new ones fail faster. We were a small team, used to low-profile jobs. That made it strange when the colonel warned us the site had irregular design features and unverified past use. That meant experiments. The Army ran many in the 50s, some legal, some not. I sensed this place had been part of the second category. The colonel left the room before we could ask questions. His aide stayed only long enough to collect the unused pages on the table. He did not let us touch them. By the time we headed into the Appalachians, the sun had already set behind the ridges. The truck driver stayed silent the whole ride. Once, when the road tilted toward a narrow bridge, he slowed and muttered a short prayer under his breath. I did not blame him. The hills felt old. Not in a peaceful way some mountains do, but in a way that made you think something lived beneath them long before any town built a road across their face. As we moved deeper that night, the soil underfoot carried a low vibration. I felt it rise through the ground and into my legs. It matched nothing I knew. Not a generator, not a mind pump. It felt steady, almost patient. I kept checking my compass even though the bearings stayed true. The air smelled faintly metallic at times, like wet iron. I had smelled that in old machine shops and in bunkers after long days of firing. Here it felt out of place. We walked until the fog thinned and the road turned to loose gravel. Harris gave a short hand signal, and we stepped off into the woods on our planned azimuth. My shoulders tightened under the pack. In the dim light, the trees looked like ribs closing around a lung. Every now and then, a moth drifted through the beam of my light and spun away. They appeared for a moment, then vanished into the dark. Our map showed the fort's old entrance somewhere ahead, a buried shape at the edge of a narrow ridge. The colonel called it sealed years earlier, but nothing in his voice sounded sure. When we stopped to check our position, the vibration in the soil felt a little stronger. I crouched and pressed my glove against the ground. For a moment, it almost felt like the mountain breathed. That was when I first wondered if the orders we carried had been written for us, or if the fort itself had called someone in. We kept moving along the ridgeline through the early light. The trees thinned as we climbed, and the cold settled deeper into my joints. A faint breeze pushed through the gaps in the branches and carried a smell like wet stone mixed with iron. It reminded me of places where machines had run for years in the dark. I tried not to connect that thought with the old fort yet. I wanted to believe most of what we sensed came from simple geology and the season. Still, something under the soil stayed steady, like a quiet note being held far longer than it should. The hillside ahead showed a shallow cut barely visible in the mix of earth and roots. It matched the rough outline on our map. The entrance should have been buried under dirt and concrete. Over time, rain and slides had shifted the shape, but the line of the ground did not look natural. It was too straight in places. The land seemed pressed down rather than built up. I felt the weight of that more than I saw it. Harris stopped us long enough for a short rest. We took sips from canteens, checked straps, and adjusted layers. No one talked. When a place feels wrong, words tend to fall short anyway. A few moths touched down on my sleeve in the weak morning light. Their wings looked pale, almost dusted with chalk. I brushed them off without thinking and watched them drift toward the ridge as if something pulled them that way. We moved on and dropped into a narrow hollow. The air grew warmer for a moment, even though the sun had not yet reached the floor of the valley. The soil under my boots felt softer, almost like the ground had been stirred not long ago. We found rusted posts in a crooked lime that might have belonged to an old fence. Some held fragments of ceramic insulators. Others leaned toward the ridge as if drawn. A few hundred yards deeper, we passed an old sign half sunk into the dirt. The paint was almost gone, but the faint outline of a number showed through. It did not match any common fort code from the region. Klein crouched and scraped mud off the corner. The edges of the metal were bent inward, not outward, like something had struck it from the direction of the ridge. He looked at me, then at the ridge itself, and got back on his feet without a word. As midday neared, we reached a break in the trees that opened into a small clearing. The ground there held long impressions, not tracks, but something close. They ran in a straight line for a short distance, then stopped. Leaf litter around the marks was undisturbed. It looked like the weight had touched down just long enough to leave a shallow stamp, then lifted again. McBride stood over them with his jaw set tight. He had seen enough odd prints overseas to know these made no sense. We crossed the clearing and followed a narrow animal trail up the last rise. From the top, the world spread into layers of ridges fading into blue haze. It should have been a peaceful view, but the low vibration under the soil turned that beauty into something strained. It was stronger there. I felt it up through my boots, into my legs, and into my ribs. My breath slowed to match it without meaning to. I forced myself to look away from the ridgelines and back at the map. The spot marked as the fort sat almost exactly below where we stood. We dropped packs for a few minutes. I stretched my back and checked my rifle again. The forest around us held the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, even when the sky stays clear. A metallic taste rode on the air. When I wiped my lips, they came away clean. The taste remained. Ortiz tried the radio again. Static filled the speaker, then cleared for a heartbeat. A short burst of code came through. It followed no current format. The style belonged to traffic used many years earlier. It repeated once. Then the static swallowed it again. Ortiz wrote it in his notebook with steady hands. He did not look up. He did not have to. We all heard it. When we shouldered our packs and headed downslope, the ground shifted in tone. The vibration deepened, like the hills knew we were coming closer. I kept my steps light, though every part of me felt the growing weight. A few more moths appeared along the path. They never clustered on one man for long, but they stayed with us, drifting just ahead or beside us. Their wings moved slow, even in the rising breeze. As the last hour of light touched the woods, we reached the final ridge. Below us lay the faint shape of the old perimeter line. Trees had grown through sections of it. Roots twisted around broken posts. The slope near the main entrance looked slumped, as if the earth had settled over something heavy. I felt a thin ache in my jaw. It came and went with the rhythm under the soil. Harris pointed toward the slope and gave the hand signal to move in. The moment he did, the air felt tighter. It stayed still, but something in it carried a sense of expectation, like we had stepped into a place that remembered us, even though we had never been there before. We started down the ridge, already knowing the fort waited in the shadows below. We moved off the ridge and into the thin trees below. The ground shifted under each step, half rock and half damp soil. The low vibration we had felt earlier grew stronger as we approached the old perimeter line. It pulsed in a slow rhythm that seemed older than any machine. I kept my jaw set to stop my teeth from picking up the faint tremble. Even then, the hum found a way into my bones. The slope took us down toward what had once been an access road. It curved through a shallow cut and vanished under years of leaf fall. I brushed a hand across the soil. A faint metallic smell lifted with the disturbed dirt. It carried the same note we had picked up miles back, but sharper now. Phillips noticed it too. He wrinkled his nose, then shrugged it off. He had spent enough years in field hospitals to know the smell of metal, but even he could not place this one. We followed the curve until a narrow break opened in the trees. There, on the old roadbed, lay a line of tire marks pressed into the dirt. They looked fresh. The edges were clean and had not softened from rain. The marks ran straight for maybe 30 yards, then vanished as if the wheels lifted off the ground. No branches were broken beyond that point. No drag marks, no turn marks, no sign of backing up. It made no sense. Vehicles do not leave clean road marks, then float away. Harris crouched over the impressions and touched the dirt. He did not speak. He never wasted talk on things we could all see. We studied the tracks a moment longer, then moved on, keeping tighter spacing now. The woods took on a heavier feel. Even the small birds kept quiet. A few minutes later, we reached the old fence line. A section of it sagged under the weight of years. Roots twisted through the mesh. Ceramic insulators clung to the top strand, cracked but still holding shape. The warning sign hung crooked, its paint turned chalky from time. The words were too faded to read, but the red border suggested chemical agents or restricted zones. Klein stepped forward and ran a finger along the metal. "Thin as paper," he whispered. Then he cut the fence with his tool, the sound soft but final. Inside the fence, my compass shifted a few degrees off its bearing, then swung back. I tapped it, thinking it might have stuck. It drifted again when I walked. Harris checked his own and gave a small frown. He placed it against the tree trunk and watched the needle settle. It took longer than it should have. The air inside the perimeter felt heavier, like the space carried its own pressure. A line of trees leaned slightly toward the hillside where the fort lay buried. Their trunks curved in a way that reminded me of trees near long-running power stations, as if they had grown toward a quiet force. The metallic smell drifted through the air in waves now, stronger near the old road and fading as we stepped away. Ortiz tapped his radio once to test reception. Static crackled. Then a faint voice cut through, clipped and distant. It spoke 3 short words. I caught only the last one. It was my name. The voice did not sound like anyone I knew. It came in the same tone used in reports, not in conversation. Before I could react, the signal dissolved. Ortiz looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I only nodded and told him to write down the fragment. We moved deeper into the trees until the slope opened into a narrow clearing. The forest floor dipped there, forming a shallow bowl. At the center lay a single deer carcass, laid out with its legs stretched straight. No sign of struggle, no tracks around it. The bones looked picked clean but not scattered. Even the smallest animals never leave a carcass so neat. Phillips knelt beside it and touched the ribs with a gloved hand. The bone felt cold, even though the day had warmed. He rose slowly and wiped his glove on his pant leg. We crossed the clearing and climbed the short rise beyond it. The soil grew darker near the top, almost black in patches. When I kicked lightly at the surface, flakes of rusted metal pressed through the dirt. They looked like fragments from old equipment. Some had straight edges, as if cut or broken under force. I turned a piece over in my hand. It held the faint smell of burnt wiring. Not far from there, we found our first clear sign of the fort. The hillside curved inward in a shape too regular to be natural. The dirt sloped in a shallow arch, and the base held a few concrete blocks pushed out by old pressure. They looked like ribs of a structure buried long ago. Gaps between them revealed cracked steel, bent inward as if pulled by the weight of earth rather than pushed. We stood there for a slow minute, letting the shape sink in. That hollow in the hillside matched the map almost exactly. The main entrance should have been somewhere inside that slump. Time and rain had pressed the soil down over the roof until the fort became part of the mountain. The vibration grew strongest there. It rose through the ground in steady waves. My heartbeat tried to match the rhythm without meaning to. I pushed back against it, grounding myself with slow breaths. The hills seemed to listen. We circled the slope and looked for another way in. The trees grew sparser near the base, and the dirt formed small ridges where water had run after storms. In the middle of one ridge sat a metal hatch, half buried, jammed at an angle. Roots clung to its sides. The handle had rusted in place. It looked like a service entrance, not the main gate. Klein stepped toward the hatch and brushed dirt off the frame. The metal vibrated faintly under his hand. He looked back at us, then knelt to test the hinges. They groaned under pressure, but did not move. We formed a line, bracing ourselves, and pushed together. The hatch shifted an inch, then another. The rusty smell filled the air. A thin draft rose from the gap, cold and stale. It carried the same metallic note we had smelled on the ridge, only stronger now. The air tasted like old wiring and damp rock. A few pale moths drifted out when the gap widened, circling once in the daylight before disappearing into the trees. When the hatch leaned open enough for us to slide through, Harris gave the signal. Time to go inside. We slipped one by one through the narrow service hatch. The metal scraped against my pack as I lowered myself inside. The air felt cold enough to bite the skin through my gloves. My breath fogged in the dim beam of my light. The stale smell of sealed rooms pushed up from the darkness, heavy with dust and old wiring. I took a slow step forward, letting my eyes adjust. The passage ran straight for a short distance, then bent to the right. Roots pushed through the ceiling in thin lines. Dirt sifted down when Klein tested the frame with a light tap. We kept our lights low to save batteries and moved in a tight line. The ground beneath my boots shifted from soil to concrete. The vibration from outside carried into the floor, steady as ever, but sharper now, like the pulse had found a clearer path through the stone. Painted lines marked the passage floor, faded to faint streaks. One line ran toward command, another toward medical, and another marked something called Adaptation. The word did not sit well with me. In most bases, sections have names that fit simple work. Adaptation did not. It felt like a label chosen by someone who wanted to hide the real purpose. Our lights brushed over the walls. Much of the paint had cracked. Some flakes drifted down when we passed. There were small dark marks near waist height on one wall, as if something had been dragged or leaned against it years earlier. I placed my fingers near a mark but stopped short. I did not want to bring anything from that place onto my glove. We reached a corridor where the ceiling panels hung at angles. A soft electrical hum drifted from a room ahead. It surprised me. Nothing in the briefing suggested any working power remained. Klein raised a hand and went forward a few steps. He checked the wall, then shook his head. "Not grid power," he whispered. "Something on battery or reserve." We entered the command room. Dust coated every surface. Rows of consoles sat in silence except for one rack on the far wall. It hummed with a weak but steady tone. The panel lights glowed dim yellow. A tape unit moved in slow jerks, its torn ribbons swinging like thin, dark strings. Ortiz studied the rack. He listened for a moment, then connected the radio to a port he found under a panel. The rack spat out a pattern of code. The rhythm felt wrong, too slow at points and too fast at others. Ortiz wrote the marks down. He shook his head as he worked. "These channels are old," he said. "No one uses them now." He tapped the unit once. The tape stuttered but kept moving. While he did that, I checked the logbooks left on a nearby desk. Most pages were blank. A few held short notes written in shaky handwriting. Some entries mentioned distortion in the lower levels. Others spoke of shifts in sound that did not match normal equipment. One line caught my eye. "The fort listens through us." I closed the book and placed it back where I found it. Harris watched me but did not ask. We spread out and searched the surrounding rooms. One held metal cabinets with doors hanging open. Papers inside had been torn, though not by animals. Another room held old cots lined against the wall. The blankets were gone, but outlines remained in the dust where objects once lay. The air grew colder the deeper we went, as if something in the structure slowly pulled heat away. A side passage led us toward the adaptation wing. At the entrance stood a wide metal door pushed half open by roots and rust. The hinges had split long ago. Inside, the corridor narrowed. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. Small chambers lined the passage, each with a padded interior. The padding had rotted and peeled, leaving bare boards and torn fabric. Someone had scratched short notes into the wooden frames. Some spelled out dates. Others were fragments of sentences, but the words made little sense on their own. At one point, I noticed a small pile of moth wings near a broken light fixture. The wings were whole, not crushed. I lifted one with the edge of my glove. It was cold and dry, as if the moth had turned brittle from the air. I let it fall back to the floor. Moments later, a living moth drifted past my face, slow and steady. Its wings beat without any breeze in the room. It floated toward the direction of the lower levels, as if drawn by something deeper in. Farther ahead, we found the first clear sign that someone else had been here after the fort's shut down. A line of footprints marked the dust. The tread pattern did not match our boots. The soles looked like military issue from the late 1950s. The prints ran toward the inner corridors, then vanished when the floor changed from dust to smoother concrete. Whoever left them had entered the place long after it had been sealed. Klein followed the prints with his light, his shoulders tight. No drag marks, he said, walked in steady. He paused, then added, but no tracks going out. We moved slowly now. Every sound seemed too loud. The vibration under the floor had changed from steady pulses to short waves that rolled through in uneven bursts. It felt like the space reacted to our presence. I tried to steady my breathing. The smell of metal sharpened again. It settled at the back of my tongue. We reached a junction where the passage split. To the left lay storage rooms. To the right, the stairwell to lower levels. The tracks led right. Harris raised 2 fingers in that direction. We advanced with caution, rifles up now. The stairwell looked narrow and steep. A faint draft came from below, almost like a slow exhale. Something had fallen on the steps years earlier and shattered. Rusty fragments of metal and glass lined the edges. As my foot touched the first step, a soft echo drifted up the shaft. Not like our movement, but like something brushing past a metal frame deeper down. We paused only a moment. Then we descended, one careful step at a time, following the tracks and the pulse under the stone, knowing the lower levels held the answers we were sent to find. The stairwell walls closed around us as we moved deeper. The concrete felt colder with each step. My light showed thin cracks that ran in long lines, almost like veins. When the vibration rolled through the structure, the cracks seemed to tremble. I told myself it was only the beam from my light shifting a little, but I was not sure. Halfway down, the air changed. It carried a dry smell, like paper left too long in a sealed box. Under that, the metallic scent grew sharp again. I felt it settle on my tongue before it reached my nose. Phillips rubbed his jaw and looked at me. He sensed it too. We reached a landing where the floor widened into a small work area. A table stood against the wall, knocked on its side. Boxes of rations sat scattered around it. The packaging looked newer than anything else in the fort. I knelt and picked one up. The date on the label placed it in the late 1950s. Too new for the fort shut down, too old for any recent supply run. The box had been opened. Most of the food was gone. McBride swept his light along the floor and froze. A cracked helmet lay near the far corner. Dried blood had stained the inside along the forehead band. The style matched helmets given to special units a few years after the fort was abandoned. A small field dressing wrapper lay beside it. The material had dried and stiffened, but I recognized the pattern. It belonged to a kit issued only to certain teams that never worked stateside. I felt a pull in my stomach. Someone had come in after the fort was shut down. They had come with updated gear. They had not walked back out. We moved slow now, checking every angle. The vibration in the floor settled into short, irregular pulses. It felt like something deeper in the fort was shifting in weak cycles, waking and resting in uneven waves. My breath tried to match the rhythm again. I forced myself to break it. Past the table, a narrow hall extended downward. The dust on the floor showed a single line of footprints leading into the dark. No return prints. The steps were steady, not rushed. That told me the person had entered with intent, not panic. We followed the hall until it opened into a small room with metal lockers along the walls. Most stood open. One lay on its back as if someone had toppled it during a struggle. Papers were scattered across the floor. Some pages showed logs with neat handwriting at the start, then shaky lines toward the end. I picked one up and read a few words aloud. They spoke of shifts in tone, patterns under the stone, and the cycle beginning without us. I folded the page and slid it back where it belonged. In the back of the room, the floor sloped down toward a metal stairwell. At the top of those steps lay a body, or what was left of one. The skeleton had wedged between the railing and the wall, as if the person had fallen and gotten stuck. The uniform had faded, but certain patches still held shape. This man had been part of the later team. I crouched near the remains. The radio strapped to the skeleton's chest sat crushed, the frame bent inward. The antenna had snapped and curled toward the body, not away. It reminded me of something pulled in by force, not broken by impact. A small envelope sat under the skeleton's arm. I reached for it and brushed away dust. Inside lay a single thin folder. The top carried a code word I had not seen before. The date stamped on the page matched the same week our own briefing had been held at Bragg. My stomach tightened when I saw the note inside. It spoke of a second activation, of self-initiated process, and of a signal expected to call for a team. The wording made my skin crawl. It hinted that our arrival was not due to any human decision, but that the fort itself had pushed out a pattern powerful enough to bring someone. I read the page twice, then handed it to Harris. He scanned it without emotion, but his jaw set in a way I had seen only a few times before. When he returned the folder, he said nothing. He did not have to. The meaning was clear. We were not the first team here. We might not be the last. We left the room and descended the metal stairs. The structure groaned under our weight. A faint draft rose from below. It carried a whisper of sound that did not match our movement. It sounded like a light brush against steel deep in the dark. The deeper we went, the more the fort felt aware of us. The metal stairs ended at a narrow landing where the air felt colder than anywhere we had been so far. A thin layer of dust lay across the floor. When I stepped onto it, the dust did not rise the way it should. It moved in a slow glide, almost like water pulled by a faint current. I watched it shift for a moment, then forced myself to keep moving. The deeper we went, the more the place worked against normal sense. The passage opened into a long hall with low ceilings. The walls formed tight angles that felt deliberate, as if someone had designed the space to keep sound pressed inward. The vibration in the floor changed again. It no longer came in steady pulses. It drifted in long waves that made my boots feel lighter for a moment, then heavier. I wondered how long the old system had been running on its own. Machines left alone for years should fall silent, not grow stranger. We passed the first chamber on the right. Its door hung open. The room inside held padded walls that had decayed into scraps. Under the rotted padding, someone had carved lines in the wood. They ran like tallies at first, but some broke off into shapes I could not place. Philip stepped closer and studied them. "Not random," he said softly. Someone returned to these marks again and again. He pressed a finger against one line and frowned. "Deep cuts," he added, "done with purpose." Farther down the hall, scratches covered the corridor itself. Some foreign loops, some dipped and crossed. They reminded me of maps drawn by someone who no longer trusted their own bearings. I followed one mark with my light and felt a faint ache behind my eyes. I looked away quickly. As we moved forward, the first clear sign of confusion among the old personnel appeared. A torn sheet of paper lay near the wall. It held short notes written in different hands. Some spoke clearly of technical tasks. Others slipped into uncertain language, mentioning rooms that shift, passages not the same twice, and voices repeating what we have not said yet. Ortiz read the lines over my shoulder and stepped back. His face tightened as if he recognized something in the wording. We continued until the hall narrowed into a steep ramp. A faint sound came from below. It was not an echo. It reminded me of footsteps heard through a floor, soft and uneven, like someone pacing without a sense of direction. We froze. The sound faded, then returned, then stopped again. Harris raised his hand, telling us to hold, then motioned us down the ramp. At the bottom lay a small open space. From there, two passages extended in opposite directions. The dust near the left passage held faint impressions of boot soles. The right passage held none. The prints on the left matched the ones we had followed earlier. They looked more hurried now. The stride length had stretched. The heel marks dug deeper. Whoever made them had started calm but ended tense. We followed the prints until they vanished again in a smooth section of floor. The air ahead felt tight, like a held breath. A flicker of movement caught my eye in the far corner. I swung my light toward it. For a brief second, I saw the outline of a figure at the edge of the beam. It wore a uniform and stood still. When the light crossed fully, nothing remained there. Only bare concrete and dust. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. I steadied myself, reminding my body that shadows play tricks in old structures. Even so, the shape had looked too clear to dismiss. We reached another junction. A sign on the wall pointed down toward a lower adaptation wing. The letters had faded, but the outline stayed visible. The space narrowed again as we entered. The walls here felt closer than anything above. Even the air seemed to hold less room. Then Klein vanished. He had been 3 steps ahead of me. The beam of his light danced along the wall, and then it was gone. I called his name once, quiet but sharp. No answer. Harris signaled us to stay calm and spread out. We swept our lights along every angle. The hall had no side doors near that spot. No drop shaft. No open grate. Yet he was gone, as if he had stepped out of sight in a space too small for that to make sense. After what felt like minutes, his light reappeared down the passage. He stood there breathing hard. His face looked pale under the beam. When he walked back to us, his steps stumbled. Phillips reached out to steady him. Klein did not speak for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I heard us talking." His voice shook. Not now, not before. Something in between. We waited for him to gather himself. When he finally looked at us, the fear in his eyes was plain. I had seen him calm under fire. I had never seen him like that. Ortiz tried the radio again, maybe out of habit, maybe to anchor himself with something familiar. A burst of sound came through. It was speech, but it followed no clear pattern. Then a few words settled and formed a sentence. It was an order. It came with proper codes. But the voice ended with a phrase only my wife used when she tried to calm me after bad dreams. I felt my stomach twist. No one in the army knew that phrase. Ortiz stared at me. He knew I had heard it. Harris looked from me to the radio, then shut it off with a firm motion. He did not want that voice speaking again. Standing there in that narrow hall, I felt the tension build. The fort had pulled us in piece by piece. It had taken our signals, our bearings, even our sense of time. Now it reached for trust. It wanted us unsure. It wanted us off balance. Harris finally spoke. "We finished what we came for," he said quietly. "We shut the source down." There was no debate. The deeper levels waited. So did the core of whatever the fort had become. We pushed deeper into the lower levels, moving in a slow line that felt tighter with each step. The air grew warmer at first, then cooled again in short waves. It reminded me of breathing, but too slow for any living thing. The light from our lamps hit the walls in uneven patches. The paint had peeled in large sheets, leaving bare concrete marked with lines that looked like someone had traced vibrations in the structure. The corridor shifted into natural rock without warning. One moment we walked on smooth concrete, the next our boots scraped stone. Long steel ribs curved overhead, holding the rock in place. They looked bent in spots, as if years of strain had pushed against them. The vibration ran stronger here. It felt like a slow drumbeat under the earth, steady enough to unsettle the rhythm in my chest. I took a breath and forced my pace to stay even. McBride grunted behind me. The ground had formed shallow dips that made every step an effort for him. His old leg injury complained more each time the vibration kicked through the floor. Phillips tried to help him without slowing the team too much. We all knew we were burning time and strength, but none of us wanted to leave a man behind in a place like that. Not in those levels. The corridor sloped downward until the ceiling rose again and opened into a long chamber. The rock walls curved around the space like the inside of a hollowed shell. Wide platforms ringed the edges, and thick cables ran along the floor toward a circular pit at the center. The air smelled sharp, like old iron mixed with something faintly electrical. A faint glow flickered from broken panels set into the stone, as if pieces of the old system refused to die. We approached the central pit. The vibration deepened until it reached my ribs. I felt it in the back of my teeth. A row of heavy transducers covered the base of the pit. Thick bolts strapped them into the rock. The cables fed into them like veins. A low hum rolled out of those machines and into the stone itself. The design looked too rough for anything modern, yet too exact for field experiments. Someone had built this place to send signals into the mountain, and they had expected to sit close enough to feel the results. benches lined the walls. The wood had dried and split, but the pattern of placement made my stomach tighten. They faced the pit, arranged like seating for observers. Whoever worked here had spent long hours inside this chamber, watching whatever these machines produced. I imagine the early teams sitting there, trying to understand the patterns before the patterns began to change them. Moths clung to the metal ribs above us, more than I had seen anywhere else in the fort. Their wings twitched in slow pulses that matched the vibration in the rock. When my light crossed them, some drifted down in loose spirals, then settled on the cables. We circled the pit, searching for the main power feed. Klein moved with purpose, his earlier fear replaced by the kind of focus he used whenever charges were needed. He traced cables with his gloves, checking anchor points. "Still live," he said. "Weak, but live." He crouched and studied the junction box. The panel hung open, revealing wires that hummed with a faint current. "We cut this, it will slow the system," he added. "But not stop it," his voice stayed firm. "We need to take out the roots." Harris nodded toward the lower platform. "We go deeper," he said, his facelift drawn in the dim light. The pressure in the chamber pressed on all of us. We moved along a narrow walkway that curved down toward another opening. The path was slick with moisture from the stone. As we stepped inside, the passage widened into a second chamber, smaller but colder. Here, the walls held niches carved directly into the rock. Inside each niche lay remains. Some bodies wore faded uniforms from different years. Others wore civilian clothes that looked older still. Most were mummified by the dry air, their faces drawn tight, their hands folded in ways that looked staged. McBride shifted his weight and hissed in pain. His leg had finally given out. He sagged to one knee. Phillips dropped beside him, checked the joint, and shook his head. "Bone's gone," he whispered. "We can move him, but slow." McBride pressed his hand against the ground and steadied himself. He did not complain. He just breathed through the pain. We fashioned a drag harness from spare straps. Harris hesitated only a moment before nodding. We could not leave McBride. Not here. Not with the walls lined with those forms. Ortiz looked toward a panel half embedded in the rock. A faint flicker passed across it. He raised his radio without thinking. The speaker stayed silent for a long second. Then it came alive with crackling bursts. A voice rolled out. It sounded like someone speaking through layers of water. The words did not form at first. When they did, they carried the tone of official traffic. They used proper cadence. But the voice changed as it spoke. It became sharper, then softer, then edged with static. Then it spoke one of our call signs, not the teen call sign. A personal one from years earlier, one I had not heard since Korea. I felt the muscles in my shoulders stiffen. The radio hissed again and began repeating the name in slow intervals. Ortiz slammed the switch and shut it down. His hands shook even after the sound died. We moved toward the rear of the chamber, where another opening led to the final level. The air felt colder there, almost damp. The smell of metal sharpened again. It felt stronger than before, nearly bitter. The walkway sloped down and ended in a circular room where the final machinery sat. Thick cables ran from wall to wall. Smaller devices lined the floor, some broken, some still humming. Klein stepped forward and studied the central junction. "We put charges here," he said. "And along those ribs, when they go, the main system dies." He paused. "But the shock will shake the whole structure." We all knew what that meant. The mountain could shift. The chambers above could collapse. We stood in a place held in place by steel ribs and old engineering. A hard enough blast could bury the entire fort under tons of stone. Harris looked at each of us in turn. No one stepped back. We started placing charges where Klein directed. Even with the fear in the air, our hands moved steady. The training held. We worked without speaking much. Every minute we stayed there, the vibration pressed deeper into our bodies, as if the fort tried to push us out or pull us closer. While Klein armed the last charge, the floor pulsed under my boots. The light in the chamber flickered. A shape passed at the edge of my vision. I turned and saw nothing. Then the vibration shifted again, rising in slow waves. We finished wiring the charges and prepared to pull out. Harris checked each line, then gave a short nod. We had one path left, get McBride up the levels and out before the blast caught us. We gripped the drag harness and started up the walkway, moving as fast as the narrow space allowed. The vibration grew sharper with each step. It felt like the mountain itself responded to what we had set in place. Behind us, one of the charges beeped softly, marking its armed state. The sound echoed through the stone in a way that made it feel much closer. We reached the first chamber again, passing the rows of benches. The moths stirred in a slow wave as our lights crossed them. Some drifted down, settling near the cables like they sensed the change coming. The ground under us shook once, light but clear, a warning. We kept climbing, knowing the blast would follow soon. We pulled McBride up the slope as fast as the narrow walkway allowed. The vibration pushed through the stone in heavy waves now. Each pulse felt deeper than the last, as if the system had sensed the charges and strained against them. My breath stayed short and sharp. Even so, I kept my steps steady. Panic would only slow us more. As we reached the upper chamber, the lights flickered hard. A cold draft swept through the space, carrying the metallic smell and a thick wave. The moths lifted from the walls all at once. Their wings beat in slow, uneven patterns, scattering pale dust into the air. For a moment, the chamber looked like it held thin snowfall in the dark. The vibration rose. It matched the beat of my heart, then passed it. My chest tightened. I felt the pressure behind my eyes. We kept moving. Ortiz tried the radio again out of pure habit. The speaker came alive with a burst of voices. They overlapped, stacking on each other. Some sounded like us, some like the men who had come before. One voice called out for help in a broken tone. Another repeated coordinates that had no meaning on any map. A third whispered a name I thought I had forgotten long ago. Then the speaker cut off on its own, the sound dropping into a silence far heavier than noise. The stairwell appeared ahead. We dragged McBride up the first steps. They shook under us, dust sifted from the ceiling. A few loose bolts rang as they bounced off the metal. I glanced back once. A faint glow rose from the deep chamber. It pulsed like a slow heartbeat, almost calm, as if the system waited for something. Klein reached the top first. He turned and helped pull McBride through. Eris pushed from below. When I stepped onto the landing, the air shifted again. A low groan rolled through the walls. The vibration turned sharp, almost violent. It felt like the fort inhaled. Then the charges went. The blast roared up through the stone, not as a sound, but as a force that lifted the floor under my boots. The walkway behind us folded inward. The glow from the pit snapped dark. Dust poured through the corridor in a thick wave. We ran. The walls cracked in long lines. Concrete flakes rained down. The vibration died so suddenly that the silence hit harder than the blast. It made my ears ring. The narrow hall twisted under fresh pressure. Some sections buckled as we pushed through. At the service hatch, daylight spilled in through thin smoke. The cold outside air hit my face like water. We dragged McBride over the threshold. The ground shifted once under us, then settled. Behind us, a deep, final rumble rolled through the hillside, like the mountain closing its jaw. The hatch slumped shut under falling dirt. A long sigh of dust rose from the slope. No more vibration pushed through the ground, no sound carried from the buried chambers. Whatever lived or lingered in that fort had lost its voice. Ortiz's radio crackled one last time. The sound was faint, barely a whisper. It carried no words I could understand. Then it went silent for good. Harris steadied himself on a tree trunk and looked back at the sealed hatch. No one spoke. We all felt the same weight. We had shut the system down, but the mountain had taken something from us in return. We gathered ourselves and moved away from the slope, leaving the buried fort behind in the quiet of the hills. We moved downhill in a slow line, each of us keeping a hand on McBride's harness as we crossed the loose soil. The cold air felt sharper out in the open, as if the mountain exhaled after years of holding its breath. No vibration followed us. No strange pulse under the ground. Only the quiet of the woods settling back into itself. A few yards from the old fence line, we stopped to rest. My hands shook from the effort, but my breath stayed steady. Phillips checked McBride's leg again. The swelling had grown, but he said the bone had set in a way that would keep him stable for the walkout. McBride nodded, tired but calm. He kept his eyes on the treetops, avoiding the direction of the buried hatch. When we reached the perimeter, a row of dark trucks waited for us. They had not been there when we entered the woods. Men in plain clothing stepped out. Their faces showed no surprise, as if they had known the exact moment we would come through the trees. They took McBride first, lifting him onto a stretcher without a word. Then they collected our gear. Radios, notebooks, spare rounds, anything that held notes or code. One of the men told us we would be driven back to Bragg. His voice carried no warmth. It was the kind of voice used for routine instructions that should not be questioned. He did not ask for a report. He did not ask what happened inside the fort. It felt like he already knew. The ride back passed in silence. No one spoke. Each man carried his own weight from the lower levels. The moth dust still clung to my sleeves. I brushed it off once, then left the rest. Some things refused to be shaken loose in one go. At Bragg, we were separated into different rooms. A new set of officers asked us for details, but they cut each story short. They wrote their own versions in front of us. Their words turned our hours underground into a simple inspection of an abandoned site. No mention of the lower machinery. No mention of the remains or the old teams. No mention of the vibration that had followed us through every corridor. When I tried to correct one page, the officer placed his finger on the paper and said, "This is the version we keep." His tone left no space for argument. I nodded once. Not in agreement, but in acceptance. Some fights do not lead anywhere. After the final round of questions, a doctor gave us quick checks. He tapped my knee, checked my eyes, and asked if I had headaches or dreams. I told him I slept fine. It was a lie, but I knew better than to share more. He made a note on his clipboard and stepped aside. That night, when I returned to my barracks room, the silence felt heavier than usual. I turned off the light and sat on the edge of the bed. The memory of the final vibration lingered in my bones. For a moment, I thought I felt it again in the floorboards. Then it passed, leaving only the faint taste of iron on the air. Something in the hills had gone quiet. But quiet does not always mean gone. The days after the mission passed with an odd stillness. Our team stayed on base, but no one spoke much. The officers told us we would resume regular duties soon. Their words felt thin, as if spoken only to fill space. None of us believed things would return to normal. I tried to file a quiet request to review our mission records, more out of habit than hope. The clerk returned with a thin folder marked under a different project name. Only a few lines described our work. All mention of the lower levels had been removed. The fort we had seen underground did not exist in their version. The folder felt lighter than anything that carried truth. As the weeks passed, the team drifted. Harris put in for a transfer overseas. He said he needed a change of pace, but I knew he wanted distance from the hills. Ortiz stopped sleeping well. He kept his radio on at night even though no channels were assigned. When I visited him once, he said he still heard faint tones in the silence. He did not say it with fear, just resignation. Phillips buried himself in medical work, quieter than before. Klein kept sketching shapes that looked like floor plans drawn in circles. He never explained them. I stayed in contact with each man for a time, but our paths spread apart. The years pressed forward, yet the memory of that place stayed near. Whenever storms rolled through, I felt a faint ache along my jaw, the same place where the vibration had settled deepest. Sometimes, when the house grew quiet at night, I thought I heard a soft hum under the floor. It always stopped when I listened too closely. One spring, long after the mission, I passed through the same region on a civilian trip. Curiosity pulled me toward the old ridge. I drove a slow mile off the main road and found the hillside fenced off. A new tower stood there, tall and clean, marked with hazard signs that did not match any local utility. No sound came from it. No workers stood nearby. Still, the air around that place felt tight, as if the ground remembered something it tried not to release. A pale moth drifted near my window. It touched the glass once, then vanished upward into the light. I drove away without stopping again. Some places close themselves for good, but the memory of stepping inside them does not let go. Even now, when the world grows quiet, I feel that old stillness return. Not the silence of peace, the silence that follows a long-held breath, the kind that waits. Now that many years have passed, I find myself writing these memories down in quiet rooms, often late at night. I keep the lights low because bright bulbs make the house feel too empty. A small desk lamp is enough. I sit there with a pencil or an old typewriter and let the story rise the way it wants to. Slow, steady, and without force. I never try to dress it up. The truth of it already carries its own weight. I have told almost no one about the fort. Most people would not understand the way a place can press into a man's thoughts long after he leaves it. They picture old buildings or broken bunkers, not the kind of structure that seems to watch its own halls. But when I think back on those days in 1963, I do not remember only fear. I remember the way the air held its breath, the way the ground spoke in slow pulses, the way even silence had shape. Sometimes I wonder what the early crews felt when they first set foot down there. They must have believed they were only studying sound and pressure. Maybe they thought they were testing limits in the rock. But some limits are not meant to be tested for long. Time bends them, place changes them, and men caught in the middle lose more than sleep. I do not claim the fort was alive. I never go that far. I only know that certain patterns feel too steady to be an accident. Something deep under those hills had learned to wait, and when the system weakened, it called. It used signals familiar enough to reach us. It sent out a pattern strong enough to pull men across ridges without them knowing why. Every now and then, a hobby radio operator posts strange logs from the mountains, odd tones that echo old codes from forgotten years. I read those notes from time to time. I never answer them. I only sit there in my kitchen, listening to my own house settle. If the refrigerator hum lasts a little longer than usual, I wait for it to pass. If a faint smell of metal rises after rain, I open a window. Last week, a pale moth landed near my porch light. It stayed there a long moment, wings still, like it recognized something in the quiet. Then it drifted away into the night. I watched it go and felt that old echo deep in my bones. The hills keep their stories. Some stay varied. Some send small reminders through the years. And some never fully let go of the men who walked too far inside. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And for more amazing horror stories, just click the ones showing right now on your screen.